What made my blood run cold wasn't just hearing my daughter-in-law Victoria call me just old during her lunch meeting with potential investors. It was that she was saying this while pitching my own AI-powered health monitoring technology as her revolutionary breakthrough to venture capitalists who had no idea I was the founder of MediCore Analytics, the startup I'd quietly sold for $1.2 million just 3 months earlier. Before we dive into this wild story, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you're ready to see how a 70-year-old has-been schooled a manipulative daughter-in-law. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, because this revenge story is about to get very satisfying. Here's what Victoria Chen didn't know as she sat in that glass conference room at TechHub Seattle, dismissing me as my husband's technologically clueless mother who still uses a flip phone. I wasn't just some outdated grandmother they could push aside after exploiting my decades of industry connections. I was Dr. Margaret Rodriguez, former MIT professor, serial entrepreneur, and the woman who had just orchestrated the sale of 3 different health tech patents while she was busy spending my investment money on designer handbags and influencer coaching sessions. Let me tell you how I went from being treated like a senile old woman who didn't understand modern business to the tech industry veteran who held the power to make or break my daughter-in-law's entire entrepreneurial fantasy. It all started 18 months ago, when my son David called me from his apartment in Capitol Hill, Seattle, his voice strained with a mixture of excitement and anxiety that I hadn't heard since he was applying to graduate school. The conversation would prove to be the beginning of the most elaborate manipulation scheme I'd encountered in my 45 years in the technology industry. "Mom, I need to tell you about Victoria's incredible business opportunity," he said. And I could hear Victoria coaching him in the background, feeding him talking points about disruptive innovation and first-mover advantage. Even through the phone, I could sense the carefully orchestrated nature of this call, though at the time I attributed it to entrepreneurial enthusiasm rather than calculated manipulation. I had been living comfortably in my craftsman home in Portland's Hawthorne district, enjoying what I thought would be a peaceful retirement after selling my last consulting firm in 2019. At 70, after spending 4.5 decades building and selling 4 different technology companies, I assumed my days of evaluating business pitches and navigating startup politics were behind me. I had my book club, my community garden, my volunteer work teaching coding to seniors at the local library. My late husband Robert had been gone for 6 years, and I'd finally found peace in a routine that didn't revolve around board meetings, product launches, and the relentless pace of Silicon Valley innovation cycles. But hearing the desperation masked as enthusiasm in David's voice triggered every maternal instinct I'd developed during his 32 years of life. My son, sweet, brilliant, and completely naive about business manipulation, had inherited his father's engineering mind and generous heart, but unfortunately none of my hard-earned skepticism about people who promised revolutionary breakthroughs. With minimal evidence, "What kind of opportunity, sweetheart?" I asked, already mentally calculating which of my liquid assets could be accessed quickly if this was another one of David's well-intentioned but poorly researched ventures. David had always been attracted to ambitious projects and charismatic people, a combination that had led to several minor financial disasters during his 20s that I'd quietly helped resolve without lecturing him about due diligence. Victoria has developed this groundbreaking health monitoring app that uses AI to predict medical emergencies before they happen, David explained, his engineering background evident in how he tried to simplify the technical aspects for what he assumed was my limited understanding. She's got prototype data showing 94% accuracy in detecting cardiac events up to 72 hours in advance. Mom, this could revolutionize preventive healthcare and save millions of lives. My scientific skepticism immediately kicked in. Those were extraordinarily high accuracy rates for predictive health analytics, especially for a solo entrepreneur without major research backing or institutional support. Having spent the previous 2 years developing my own AI-powered health monitoring technology, I knew exactly how challenging it was to achieve even 70% accuracy in cardiac event prediction, much less 94%. The technical and regulatory hurdles alone were staggering, requiring extensive clinical trials, FDA approval processes, and partnerships with major healthcare institutions. But I kept my concerns to myself, not wanting to dampen David's obvious excitement about his girlfriend's work or appear to be the interfering mother who immediately questioned his judgment. At this stage, I was still assuming this was a case of an enthusiastic entrepreneur overselling their preliminary results rather than deliberate deception. "That sounds very ambitious," I said carefully, choosing my words to express interest without commitment. "What kind of support is she looking for?" "She needs $200,000 to finish the development phase and prepare for Series A funding," David said, his voice taking on the rehearsed quality that suggested Victoria had coached him extensively on this presentation. "Mom, this could be the next Apple Health or Fitbit. Victoria's brilliant. She has an MBA from Wharton and has been working in health tech for 3 years. She just needs someone who believes in her vision enough to provide bridge funding until the major investors recognize the potential." $200,000. It was a substantial amount, but not unreasonable for early-stage health technology development, assuming the technology actually existed and showed genuine promise. What concerned me more was David's complete buy-in to Victoria's pitch without any apparent due diligence or technical verification. He was repeating her claims about accuracy rates and market potential without seeming to understand the underlying science or business model. "David, that's a significant investment," I said. "I'd love to learn more about Victoria's technology and business plan before making any decisions. Could we arrange a meeting where she can walk me through the technical specifications, clinical, data, and market analysis?" There was a brief pause, and I could hear muffled conversation in the background before David returned to the phone. "Actually, Mom, Victoria was hoping you could make the investment decision based on the executive summary she's prepared. She's incredibly busy with development work and investor meetings, and she doesn't want to spend time on presentations for family members who might not understand the technical complexity. She's already had to simplify the documentation significantly for potential investors who don't have deep healthcare technology backgrounds." Red flag number 1. Any legitimate entrepreneur should be eager to explain their technology to potential investors, especially ones with relevant industry experience. The fact that Victoria was avoiding detailed technical discussions suggested either that she didn't fully understand her own product or that the product didn't exist as described. In my experience, founders who had genuine breakthrough technology were usually eager to discuss the technical details with anyone who would listen, often to the point of overselling the complexity. But David was clearly invested, emotionally, and probably financially already, in Victoria's success. Challenging her directly would only strain my relationship with my son and make me look like an interfering mother who didn't support his girlfriend's ambitions. I had learned from previous experiences with David's romantic relationships that direct criticism usually backfired, causing him to become more defensive and committed to proving me wrong. "Of course," I said. "I'd be happy to review her materials. But David, I do want to meet Victoria properly before making any financial commitments. If she's going to be working with family money, we should all be comfortable with each other." "That makes total sense, Mom. Victoria's really excited to meet you too. She's heard so much about your business background, and she's hoping to get your advice about scaling technology companies." My business background. I wondered exactly how much David had told Victoria about my career, and whether she understood that her potential investor wasn't just a retired woman with disposable income, but someone who had built and sold multiple technology companies in the exact sector she was claiming to revolutionize. David had always been somewhat vague about the specifics of my work, describing me to friends as my mom who used to work in computers, rather than explaining my actual role in developing early artificial intelligence applications for healthcare diagnostics. The executive summary that arrived 3 days later was professionally formatted and impressively comprehensive, covering market analysis, competitive landscape, technical specifications, and financial projections. Victoria had clearly invested significant time and effort in creating documentation that looked legitimate and thoroughly researched. However, as someone who had reviewed hundreds of startup pitches during my venture capital consulting years, I immediately noticed several concerning elements. The market analysis relied heavily on generic industry reports rather than specific competitive analysis or customer validation studies. The technical specifications were detailed enough to sound impressive, but vague enough to avoid making testable claims about performance or methodology. Most concerning were the financial projections, which assumed rapid user acquisition and revenue, growth without accounting for the lengthy sales cycles, regulatory approval processes, and compliance requirements that made healthcare technology notoriously difficult and expensive to scale. Victoria was projecting break-even within 18 months and profitability within 2 years, timelines that would be ambitious for any healthcare startup, and completely unrealistic for a solo entrepreneur without institutional backing. But what really triggered my professional alarm bells was Victoria's description of her current consulting work that was supposedly funding the early development phases. According to her documentation, she had been working with several major healthcare organizations to implement early versions of my predictive analytics technology, generating substantial consulting revenue while gathering real-world data to refine the algorithms. She listed 3 healthcare systems as current clients, claiming that her consulting work was providing both funding and validation for the core technology. This claim was either dramatically understating the complexity of her achievements, or it was a complete fabrication. Implementing predictive healthcare analytics in major hospital systems required FDA approval, clinical trials, institutional review board oversight, extensive validation studies, and compliance with HIPAA privacy regulations. The idea that a solo consultant could be implementing early versions of revolutionary predictive technology across multiple healthcare organizations was practically impossible without significant institutional support and regulatory approval. Spent the next week conducting my own research into Victoria's background and claims. What I discovered was both impressive and concerning. Victoria Chen was indeed a legitimate healthcare consultant with an MBA from Wharton and 3 years of experience working with mid-sized healthcare organizations on process improvement and data analytics projects. Her LinkedIn profile and professional references confirmed that she was skilled, knowledgeable, and well-regarded within her niche. However, her actual consulting work focused on relatively mundane operational analytics, patient flow optimization, resource allocation modeling, and basic performance dashboards. There was no evidence of the revolutionary AI development or predictive analytics implementation she was claiming in her business plan. Most tellingly, the 3 healthcare organizations she listed as current clients for her predictive technology implementation were actually clients for basic operational consulting projects that had concluded months earlier. When I discreetly contacted professional acquaintances at 2 of these organizations, they confirmed that Victoria had done good work on process improvement projects, but had never been involved in any AI development or predictive analytics initiatives. Victoria was taking legitimate but routine consulting experience and inflating it into claims about revolutionary technology development. She was essentially running a sophisticated con game, using real credentials and professional experience to create believability for completely fabricated technological achievements. But what made the situation particularly complex was that Victoria wasn't just lying to me. She seemed to have convinced David, and possibly herself, that her routine consulting work represented the foundation for a breakthrough healthcare technology company. She had created an elaborate fantasy around her modest professional achievements, and she was now seeking to fund that fantasy with my money. 3 weeks after receiving her business plan, Victoria came to Portland for what David had described as a casual get-to-know-you dinner, but which clearly served as her formal investor pitch meeting. Victoria Chen arrived at my home looking every inch the successful tech entrepreneur, polished, articulate, and radiating the kind of confidence that comes from years of being the smartest person in most rooms. She was 31 years old, impeccably dressed in the studied casual style of Seattle tech culture, and possessed of the rapid-fire speaking pattern that suggested she was used to commanding attention and making quick decisions. "Dr. Rodriguez, it's such an honor to finally meet you," she said as I welcomed her into my home, her handshake firm and her eye contact direct in the way that suggested media training or extensive practice. "David has told me so much about your incredible career in technology. I'm hoping to learn from someone with your experience in building scalable businesses." The flattery was well delivered, but felt calculated, rather than genuine. Victoria's research into my background had clearly been thorough enough to know my academic credentials and business history, but I suspected it had been superficial enough to miss the specific details that would be most relevant to evaluating her pitch. Skal. We settled into dinner. Victoria launched into her presentation with the polish of someone who had given this pitch many times before. She spoke passionately about the potential for AI-powered predictive healthcare, the limitations of current monitoring technologies, and the massive market opportunity for breakthrough solutions that could prevent medical emergencies rather than just responding to them. Her technical knowledge was impressive but not deep. She could speak fluently about machine learning algorithms, data pre-processing techniques, and integration challenges. But when I asked specific questions about training datasets, validation methodologies, or algorithmic bias mitigation, her answers became more general and less confident. "The technical details are quite complex," she said when I pressed for specifics about her accuracy claims. "I've been working with several data scientists and machine learning experts to develop proprietary algorithms that I obviously can't discuss in detail due to competitive intelligence concerns." Several data scientists and machine learning experts. This was the first mention of collaborators in what she had previously described as her solo entrepreneurship journey. When I asked about her technical team, Victoria became vague about their identities, roles, and compensation arrangements. "I'm working with consultants and contractors right now," she explained. "Once we secure bridge funding, I'll be able to bring key team members on full-time and accelerate the development process significantly." Red flag number 2. Legitimate AI development requires consistent collaboration with technical experts who understand both the algorithms and the domain-specific applications. The idea that Victoria was developing breakthrough predictive healthcare technology using unnamed contractors paid from consulting revenue was highly implausible. But what really revealed Victoria's strategy was her approach to discussing my role as an investor. Rather than treating me as a potential business partner who would want ongoing involvement and oversight, she positioned me as a passive funding source who would provide capital and then step back while she executed her vision. "I really value your experience and would love to have you as an advisor," she said. "But I know you're enjoying retirement and probably don't want to get involved in the day-to-day operations of a demanding startup. This investment would allow you to support innovative healthcare technology without the stress of active involvement." Support innovative healthcare technology without the stress of active involvement. Victoria was essentially offering to take my money in exchange for the privilege of watching from the sidelines while she built what she claimed would be a revolutionary company. When I suggested that any significant investment would require technical due diligence, regular progress reports, and milestone-based funding releases, Victoria's demeanor shifted subtly but noticeably. "Dr. Rodriguez, I really appreciate your thoroughness, but the opportunity is quite time-sensitive," Victoria said, her smile becoming slightly strained. "I have other investors who are ready to move quickly, and I was hoping to keep the family investment simple and straightforward. Too much oversight and reporting can actually slow down development and create unnecessary complications. Other investors ready to move quickly. Time-sensitive opportunities. Simple and straightforward family investments. These were classic pressure tactics used to discourage due diligence and rush financial decisions. "I understand the urgency," I replied calmly, drawing on decades of experience with high-pressure sales situations. "But any legitimate investor, family or otherwise, is going to want technical and financial verification before committing significant capital. If your other investors are willing to skip due diligence, they may not be the kind of partners you want for long-term success. Victoria's expression shifted to barely concealed irritation, though she maintained her professional demeanor. For just a moment, I caught a glimpse of someone who was accustomed to getting her way through charm and persuasion, and who didn't appreciate having her assumptions challenged. Of course, you're absolutely right about due diligence being important for major investments, she said, her tone becoming slightly condescending. It's just that the technical details are quite complex, and I wasn't sure how much deep technical analysis would be helpful for someone who's been retired from active technology work for several years. Someone who's been retired from active technology work. Victoria had just revealed that despite all her research into my background, she had fundamentally misunderstood both my recent activities and my current capabilities. She saw me as an outdated, former entrepreneur, rather than someone who had remained actively involved in technology investment and development. That misperception would prove to be a very expensive mistake for Victoria Chen. But what she couldn't have known, as she sat in my living room dismissing my technical competence while asking for my money, was that 3 months earlier, I had quietly completed the sale of MediCore Analytics, the AI-powered health monitoring startup I had been developing for the past 2 years, to a major healthcare technology company for $1.2 million. The retired old woman she was trying to manipulate was actually her direct competitor in the exact market she claimed to be revolutionizing. And I was about to discover just how far Victoria was willing to go to exploit what she thought was an easy target for financial manipulation. The woman who would soon call me just old was about to learn that experience, connections, and strategic thinking don't diminish with age. They become more refined and considerably more dangerous when underestimated. Looking back now, I realized that Victoria's dinner visit to my Portland home wasn't just a casual family introduction. It was a carefully orchestrated performance designed to secure my investment while establishing the power dynamics that would govern our relationship for the next 18 months. What I couldn't have anticipated was how thoroughly she had researched not just my financial capacity, but my psychological vulnerabilities as a widowed mother eager to maintain a close relationship with her only son. The evening had ended with Victoria graciously accepting my insistence on proper due diligence, though I could see the frustration flickering behind her professional smile. We agreed that she would provide additional technical documentation, financial projections, and references from her supposed healthcare clients, while I would have my advisors review her materials and structure an appropriate investment framework. I really appreciate your careful approach, Dr. Rodriguez, Victoria said as she prepared to leave, her tone perfectly calibrated to sound grateful rather than impatient. David is so lucky to have a mother who combines business expertise with genuine caring. I hope we can build the kind of family and professional relationship that benefits everyone involved. The kind of family and professional relationship that benefits everyone involved. At the time, I interpreted this as standard entrepreneur politeness. Looking back, I recognize it as the opening move in a sophisticated manipulation strategy that would gradually transform me from an equal business partner into a controlled funding source. 3 days after Victoria returned to Seattle, David called with news that should have been wonderful, but instead filled me with a complex mixture of joy and apprehension. "Mom, I have incredible news," David said, his voice bubbling with excitement. "Victoria and I are engaged. She said yes last night, and we're both over the moon about starting this next chapter together." Engaged. After dating for only 8 months, during 6 of which Victoria had been actively courting my investment in her business venture. The timing struck me as remarkably convenient. David's emotional commitment to Victoria would now be legally and socially formalized just as I was conducting due diligence on her business claims. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, pushing aside my concerns to focus on David's happiness. "I'm so excited for both of you." Victoria seems like an accomplished, ambitious woman who will be a great partner for you. She really is, Mom. And the timing is perfect because Victoria's business is really starting to take off. She's been working around the clock to prepare for the next funding round, and having family support is going to make such a difference in her ability to focus on growth rather than constantly fundraising. Family support. David was already positioning my potential investment as family obligation rather than business transaction, a framing that would make it much more difficult for me to maintain appropriate oversight or withdraw funding if Victoria's claims proved false. David, I'm thrilled about the engagement, and I want to support Victoria's business if it's legitimate and well-planned, I said carefully. But we should keep the family relationship separate from any business arrangements. That protects everyone involved and prevents potential conflicts down the road. Of course, Mom. Victoria completely agrees about keeping things professional on the business side. She's actually been saying how much she appreciates your experience and how much she wants to learn from someone who's built successful companies. Over the following weeks, Victoria provided the additional documentation I had requested, and I began a thorough review with my technical and financial advisors. What we discovered was both impressive and deeply concerning. Victoria's business plan was extraordinarily sophisticated, incorporating detailed market analysis, competitive intelligence, technical specifications, and financial projections that demonstrated significant research and planning. However, virtually every substantive claim in the documentation was either exaggerated, misleading, or completely fabricated. Her claimed partnerships with major healthcare organizations turned out to be routine consulting contracts that had ended months earlier. Her proprietary AI algorithms were based on publicly available machine learning libraries with minor customizations. Her clinical validation studies were actually small-scale data analysis projects that had never been submitted for peer review or regulatory approval. Most damaging was what my technical advisors discovered about Victoria's actual qualifications and experience. While she did have an MBA from Wharton and legitimate consulting experience, her technical background was far more limited than her business plan suggested. She had taken several online courses in data science and machine learning, but had no formal training in artificial intelligence, healthcare informatics, or the regulatory requirements for medical device development. Dr. Rodriguez, said Patricia Kim, the technical consultant I had hired to evaluate Victoria's claims, this business plan reads like someone took a basic understanding of healthcare analytics and extrapolated it into a fantasy about revolutionary AI development. The technical specifications are detailed enough to sound impressive, but they describe systems that would require teams of PhD-level researchers and millions of dollars in development funding. Is there any chance that Victoria actually has access to the expertise and resources she's claiming? I asked. Based on our investigation, absolutely not. The healthcare organizations she lists as partners have no record of any AI development projects involving her. The technical collaborators she mentions either don't exist or have never worked with her on anything resembling what she's describing. This appears to be an elaborate fiction designed to attract investment for a business that exists primarily in her imagination. An elaborate fiction designed to attract investment for a business that exists primarily in her imagination. Those words should have ended my involvement with Victoria's venture immediately. But the situation was complicated by several factors that made it difficult for me to simply walk away. First, David was genuinely excited about both his engagement and Victoria's business prospects. He had already begun telling friends and colleagues about his fiancé's groundbreaking healthcare startup and his mother's supportive investment. Exposing Victoria's deception would not only end their relationship, but also humiliate David professionally and personally. Second, Victoria had been careful to build personal relationships beyond just her business pitch. She called regularly to ask for advice about wedding planning, entrepreneurship challenges, and navigating family dynamics. She had positioned herself as the daughter-in-law who valued my experience and wanted to learn from my success, making it much more difficult to reject her business proposal without seeming to reject her personally. Most importantly, Victoria had begun subtly shifting her requests in ways that made them seem less like business investments and more like family support. Rather than asking for $200,000 in startup funding, she began talking about needing help with bridging the gap between consulting revenue and full-time business development and managing the financial stress that comes with entrepreneurial risk-taking. "Dr. Rodriguez, I hope you don't mind me being personal about this," Victoria said during one of our phone conversations. "But the uncertainty of startup life is really challenging for David and me as we're planning our wedding and thinking about our future together. Having some financial security would allow me to focus on building the business rather than constantly worrying about paying rent and buying groceries." Financial security for David and Victoria as they planned their wedding and future together. Victoria was gradually transforming her business investment request into a family support obligation, making it much more difficult for me to evaluate the proposal on purely business terms. But what really demonstrated Victoria's sophisticated understanding of manipulation was how she began incorporating concerns about my age and well-being into our conversations. "David mentioned that you've been living alone since your husband passed," Victoria said during another call, her tone perfectly calibrated to sound caring rather than intrusive. "It must be difficult to maintain such a large house and manage all your financial affairs without his support. David and I were thinking that having us closer to Portland might be helpful for everyone. We could spend more time together as a family, and you'd have people nearby who care about your well-being." Having us closer to Portland, Victoria was suggesting that my investment in her business would not only support their entrepreneurial dreams, but also provide me with the family companionship I presumably craved as a lonely widow. She was positioning the financial arrangement as mutually beneficial. I would get the emotional support I needed while they would get the capital they needed. This approach was particularly insidious because it contained enough truth to be believable. I did sometimes feel isolated in my large house, and I did want to maintain a close relationship with David as he started his own family. Victoria was exploiting these legitimate emotional needs to create urgency around her financial requests. The manipulation escalated significantly after Victoria and David's engagement party, which I attended in Seattle in late fall. The event was held at an upscale restaurant in Capitol Hill, with about 50 guests, including Victoria's professional colleagues, David's friends from his engineering job, and several family members from both sides. During the party, I had the opportunity to observe Victoria in her natural social environment, and what I saw was both impressive and troubling. Victoria was clearly the center of attention, holding court with stories about her innovative healthcare startup and her plans for disrupting traditional approaches to preventive medicine. She spoke with confidence and authority about technical concepts, market opportunities, and regulatory challenges, demonstrating either genuine expertise or remarkable skill at sounding knowledgeable about topics she didn't actually understand. But what concerned me most was how Victoria presented my role in her business venture to the other guests. "I'm so fortunate to have Margaret's support and mentorship," she told a group that included several tech industry professionals. "She's been incredibly generous with both her time and her resources, and having someone with her experience and connections involved gives me so much confidence about our ability to scale successfully." Her support and mentorship. Victoria was already describing our tentative discussions as confirmed partnership, and she was positioning my potential investment as validation of her business model rather than family assistance that required ongoing evaluation. Later in the evening, I overheard a conversation between Victoria and two of her former colleagues from her consulting work. "How are you managing the transition from consulting to full-time entrepreneurship?" one of them asked. "That's always a challenging financial period." "Honestly, it's been much easier than I expected," Victoria replied. "David's family has been incredibly supportive, both emotionally and financially. His mother understands the startup world and believes in the potential of what we're building. Having that kind of backing allows me to focus on development and growth rather than constantly worrying about funding. David's family has been incredibly supportive, both emotionally and financially. Victoria was already describing my potential investment as completed fact, and she was using my supposed backing to enhance her credibility with other professionals in her field. The most revealing moment came when Victoria introduced me to Dr. James Chen, a healthcare administrator who worked at one of the hospital systems she had claimed as a current client for her AI development work. "Margaret, I'd like you to meet James Chen from Pacific Northwest Medical Center," Victoria said smoothly. "James has been incredibly supportive of my work in predictive analytics." Dr. Chen looked puzzled. "I'm sorry, Victoria, but I don't think we've worked together on any predictive analytics projects. Didn't you do some process improvement consulting for our cardiac care unit last year?" Victoria's expression didn't change, but I caught the brief flash of panic in her eyes before she recovered. "Oh, of course. The process improvement work was the foundation for understanding how predictive analytics could be integrated into existing workflows," she said quickly. "I've been building on those insights to develop the AI applications I mentioned. Victoria had smoothly transformed Dr. Chen's correction into validation of her broader narrative, but the exchange confirmed my suspicions about her tendency to inflate routine consulting work into claims about revolutionary technology development. After the party, as David drove me back to my hotel, he was effusive about how well the evening had gone and how impressed everyone had been with Victoria's business acumen. "Mom, did you see how engaged everyone was when Victoria talked about her healthcare startup?" David said enthusiastically. "Even the people who work in healthcare were asking detailed questions and seemed really excited about the potential applications." "She's certainly articulate and confident," I replied carefully. "But David, did you notice the exchange between Victoria and Dr. Chen? It seemed like there might be some confusion about the scope of their previous work together." David waved off my concern. "Oh, that was just a miscommunication about terminology. Victoria's been working with so many different healthcare organizations that it's natural for people to remember different aspects of her involvement. The important thing is that she's building real relationships and getting validation from people who understand the industry." Real relationships and validation from people who understand the industry. David had interpreted Victoria's awkward explanation as evidence of her extensive professional network rather than recognition of her tendency to exaggerate her achievements. Over the next few months, Victoria's requests for financial support became more frequent and more substantial. Rather than asking for a single investment in her startup, she began presenting a series of funding needs related to business development, wedding expenses, and general living costs. "Dr. Rodriguez, I hate to keep asking for help, but we're facing some unexpected challenges," Victoria said during one of our regular phone conversations. "The wedding venue required a larger deposit than we anticipated, and with my consulting income being irregular while I transition to full-time startup work, we're feeling some financial pressure." Wedding venue deposits and irregular consulting income. Victoria was gradually expanding the scope of my financial responsibility beyond business investment to general life support for her and David. "How much additional support are you looking for?" I asked. "Well, the wedding costs are about $15,000 more than we originally budgeted, and we could really use some help covering living expenses for the next few months while I focus on fundraising and product development. Maybe another $25,000 would give us the breathing room we need." Another $25,000? Combined with the original $200,000 business investment request, Victoria was now asking for $240,000 in various forms of support, and she was framing it as temporary assistance rather than permanent funding. But what made these requests particularly manipulative was how Victoria had begun incorporating concerns about my relationship with David into her appeals for financial support. David feels terrible about having to ask his mother for help, Victoria said, her voice taking on a tone of intimate concern. He's worried that you might think less of him for not being able to support his fiancée independently. I keep telling him that family support is normal and healthy, but he's so proud and independent. Having your backing would mean everything to him, even beyond the financial relief. David feels terrible. He's worried you might think less of him. Victoria was using my son's presumed emotional state to create urgency around her funding requests, making it seem like refusing to provide money would damage my relationship with David. This tactic was particularly effective because it contained enough psychological truth to be believable. David was proud and independent, and he probably would feel uncomfortable asking his mother for large amounts of money. By positioning herself as the intermediary who understood both David's needs and my capabilities, Victoria was creating a dynamic where she controlled the flow of information and emotional interpretation between my son and me. The manipulation reached a new level when Victoria began sharing details about their apartment hunting and future planning that seemed designed to emphasize their financial vulnerability and my potential role in resolving it. We've been looking at places in Bellevue and Redmond because that's where most of the tech companies are located, Victoria told me during one conversation. But the rent prices are just incredible. We're talking about $3,500 to $4,000 per month for anything decent. David's engineering salary is good, but with my income being uncertain during the startup phase, we're not qualifying for the places that would really support my business networking and development needs. $3,500 to $4,000 per month rent. Victoria was describing housing costs that would consume most of David's take-home pay, creating an implicit argument for why they needed financial assistance to maintain the lifestyle necessary for her business success. Have you considered less expensive areas that might still provide good access to the tech industry? I asked. We have, but location is really important for startup success, Victoria replied. Being in the right neighborhoods, attending the right networking events, living in places where potential investors and partners feel comfortable visiting, all of that matters for building credibility and making connections. Being in the right neighborhoods for startup success. Victoria was arguing that my financial support wasn't just helping them personally, but was actually a business investment in creating the social and professional environment necessary for her entrepreneurial success. By this point, I had begun to realize that Victoria's strategy was far more sophisticated than simple financial fraud. She wasn't just lying about her business capabilities, she was systematically creating a web of emotional, social, and financial dependencies that would make it extremely difficult for me to withdraw support once I had begun providing it. If I gave Victoria the money she was requesting, I wouldn't just be funding a questionable business venture. I would be enabling a lifestyle and set of expectations that would require ongoing financial support. More importantly, I would be allowing Victoria to position herself as the intermediary between David and me, controlling how information flowed between us and interpreting our respective needs and motivations. But what Victoria couldn't have known, as she carefully constructed this elaborate manipulation scheme, was that I had spent the previous 6 months quietly selling my own health technology startup for $1.2 million to a major healthcare company. The retired old woman she was systematically manipulating for financial support was actually a successful entrepreneur in the exact industry she was claiming to revolutionize. I had real experience with AI-powered healthcare analytics, genuine relationships with the investors and healthcare organizations she was pretending to work with, and detailed knowledge of both the technical and business challenges she was claiming to have solved. Most importantly, I had the financial resources and professional network to independently verify every claim Victoria was making about her background, capabilities, and business prospects. The woman who would soon dismiss me as just old was about to discover that decades of experience in technology entrepreneurship had taught me not just how to build successful companies, but how to recognize and respond to sophisticated manipulation schemes. Victoria Chen was playing a complex game with someone who had invented several of the rules she was trying to use against me. And she had no idea that her target was not only aware of her strategy, but was actively documenting every move she made for future reference. The stakes were about to become much higher than Victoria had anticipated, and the power dynamics she thought she was controlling were about to shift in ways that would expose the true scope of her deception and manipulation. The transformation of Victoria from grateful potential daughter-in-law to calculating financial manipulator didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual process, so expertly orchestrated that I didn't recognize the full scope of her strategy until I was already deeply entangled in a web of emotional, financial, and family obligations that seemed impossible to escape without destroying my relationship with David. Looking back, I can see that the manipulation began in earnest immediately after their engagement. But it was disguised so cleverly as normal family relationship building and entrepreneurial enthusiasm that I initially felt grateful for Victoria's attention rather than suspicious of her motives. The first significant shift occurred in early December, about 6 weeks after the engagement party. Victoria had begun calling me regularly, not just to discuss business matters, but to seek advice about wedding planning, career decisions, and what she described as her desire to build a strong relationship with David's family. "Dr. Rodriguez, I hope you don't mind me reaching out so often," Victoria said during one of these calls, her tone perfectly calibrated to sound both respectful and intimate. "I never had a close relationship with my own mother, and I'm hoping we can build the kind of connection that will make our family stronger. The kind of connection that will make our family stronger." Victoria was positioning our relationship as crucial to David's happiness and family unity, making it much more difficult for me to maintain appropriate boundaries or question her requests without seeming to reject her personally. These conversations were remarkably sophisticated in their emotional intelligence. Victoria would begin each call by asking about my daily activities, my health, my volunteer work at the library, and my feelings about the upcoming holidays. She demonstrated impressive retention of personal details from previous conversations, remembering the names of my book club members, asking about specific projects I was working on, and expressing genuine-seeming interest in my thoughts about everything from local Portland politics to advances in artificial intelligence research. "I was reading an article about machine learning applications in healthcare," Victoria mentioned during one conversation, "and it made me think of our discussion about your early work in medical informatics. The field has evolved so much since you were actively involved. It must be fascinating to see how your foundational work has influenced current developments. Since you were actively involved." Victoria was subtly reinforcing the narrative that my expertise was historical rather than current, positioning herself as the contemporary expert who could bridge the gap between my outdated knowledge and modern realities. She was systematically undermining my confidence in my own technical competence, while appearing to show respect for my past achievements. But what made these conversations particularly effective was how Victoria began incorporating concerns about David's well-being and our family relationships into discussions about her business needs and financial requests. "David has been working such long hours lately," Victoria would say, her voice filled with what sounded like genuine concern. "I think he's feeling pressure to increase his income because he knows how expensive the wedding is going to be, and he doesn't want to burden you with costs that should be our responsibility. But I keep telling him that family support is natural and healthy, especially when it's temporary assistance to help us get established. David has been working long hours because he feels pressure about wedding costs." Victoria was creating a narrative where my son was suffering due to financial stress that I had the power to relieve, making her requests seem less like personal benefit and more like family care. This tactic was particularly insidious because it contained enough truth to be believable. David was indeed working long hours, and he probably was concerned about wedding expenses. By positioning herself as the caring fiancé who understood both David's needs and my capabilities, Victoria was establishing herself as the essential intermediary who could solve problems for everyone involved. The requests themselves escalated gradually and were always framed as temporary assistance rather than permanent dependency. What started as the $200,000 business investment had expanded to include wedding costs, living expenses, and what Victoria described as bridge funding to help them establish financial stability during her transition from consulting to full-time entrepreneurship. "I hate having to ask for more help," Victoria said during a call in mid-December. "But we've encountered some unexpected expenses that are making it difficult to manage everything we committed to. The wedding venue costs increased, David's car needs major repairs, and I had to invest in some professional development courses to stay current with the latest AI and machine learning techniques." Professional development courses to stay current with AI and machine learning techniques. Victoria was claiming that her requests for additional money were actually investments in maintaining her technical competence that would presumably benefit the business venture I was considering funding. "How much additional support are you looking for?" I asked, though by this point I was beginning to recognize the pattern of escalating requests that would likely continue regardless of how much I provided. "Another $30,000 would really help us get through the next few months without stress," Victoria replied. "It sounds like a lot, I know, but it would cover the wedding cost overruns, David's car repairs, my professional development, and give us enough breathing room to focus on business development rather than constantly worrying about money." Another $30,000. Combined with the original $200,000 business investment and the previous $25,000 for wedding and living expenses, Victoria was now requesting $255,000 in total support. More concerning was her casual assumption that I would provide this money without detailed accounting or specific repayment terms. But what really demonstrated Victoria's sophisticated understanding of psychological manipulation was how she began, incorporating my personal circumstances and emotional needs into her justifications for financial support. "David mentioned that the holidays have been difficult for you since your husband passed," Victoria said during one particularly manipulative conversation. "He's worried about you spending Christmas alone, and we were thinking that having our financial situation more stable would allow us to spend more time in Portland over the holidays. If we didn't have to worry about money, I could take time off from consulting work to really focus on building our family relationships. Having our financial situation more stable would allow us to spend more time in Portland." Victoria was arguing that my financial support would not only help them, but would directly benefit me by enabling the family companionship I presumably craved as a lonely widow. This approach was particularly effective because it addressed real emotional needs I was experiencing. I did sometimes feel isolated during the holidays, and I did want to maintain close relationships with David as he started his own family. Victoria was exploiting these legitimate feelings to create urgency around her financial requests while making them seem mutually beneficial rather than one-sided exploitation. The manipulation became even more sophisticated when Victoria began sharing details about their apartment search and lifestyle planning that seemed designed to demonstrate both their financial vulnerability and the social and professional necessity of maintaining certain standards. "We've been looking at places in the East Side Tech Corridor," Victoria told me during one conversation, "because that's where most of the AI and healthcare startups are located. But the rent prices are just incredible. We're looking at $4,500 to $5,000 per month for anything that would be appropriate for entertaining potential investors and business partners. $4,500 to $5,000 per month for rent. That would be appropriate for entertaining investors and business partners." Victoria was describing housing costs that would consume the majority of David's take-home pay, while justifying the expense as necessary for her business development rather than personal luxury. "Have you considered less expensive options that might still provide good access to the tech industry?" I asked. "We have, but location and image are really crucial for startup success," Victoria replied with what sounded like reluctant pragmatism. When you're asking people to invest in your vision, they need to see that you're already operating at a certain level of professionalism and success. Living in a modest apartment in a less desirable area sends the wrong message to potential investors and partners. Living in a modest apartment sends the wrong message to potential investors. Victoria was arguing that my financial support wasn't enabling extravagance, but was actually a necessary business investment in creating the professional image required for entrepreneurial success. This justification was particularly insidious because it contained enough truth to be plausible while obscuring the fundamental deception about Victoria's actual business prospects and capabilities. She was using legitimate principles about professional image and networking to justify lifestyle expenses that were completely disproportionate to her actual income and business potential. But the most revealing aspect of Victoria's manipulation strategy was how she began controlling the flow of information between David and me, positioning herself as the interpreter of both our needs and motivations. David feels terrible about how much we're having to ask for help, Victoria would tell me, but he's also incredibly grateful for your support and understanding. He keeps saying how lucky he is to have a mother who not only has the resources to help, but who understands the challenges of building a business and starting a family. How lucky he is to have a mother who understands the challenges of building a business. Victoria was interpreting David's feelings for me while simultaneously creating pressure for me to live up to her description of my character and capabilities. Conversely, when talking to David, Victoria apparently described me as enthusiastic about supporting their ventures and eager to be more involved in their lives. Victoria says you're really excited about her business plan, David told me during one of our conversations, and that you've been incredibly generous with both financial support and strategic advice. She feels so fortunate to have someone with your experience willing to mentor her through the early stages of company building. Really excited about her business plan and incredibly generous with financial support. Victoria was describing my cautious consideration and preliminary discussions as confirmed enthusiasm and commitment, making it much more difficult for me to express concerns or withdraw support without seeming to contradict what David believed about my involvement. This information control was particularly effective because it created a situation where both David and I were operating based on Victoria's interpretations of each other's feelings and intentions, rather than on direct communication. She was essentially conducting parallel manipulation campaigns designed to maximize pressure from both sides, while minimizing the opportunity for David and me to compare notes about what Victoria was actually requesting and promising. The strategy reached a new level of sophistication during the Christmas holidays, when Victoria and David came to Portland for what she described as a family planning and business strategy session. The visit was structured around a series of activities that seemed designed to reinforce both the personal and professional aspects of Victoria's relationship with me. We spent time looking at wedding venues, discussing business development strategies, and engaging in what Victoria called multi-generational wealth planning conversations. Dr. Rodriguez, I've been thinking about how your experience and resources could be leveraged, not just to support our immediate needs, but to create long-term value for our entire family, Victoria said during one of these conversations. You've built significant wealth through strategic business development, and we're at the perfect stage to benefit from both your financial resources and your expertise. Multi-generational wealth planning and leveraging your experience and resources for long-term family value. Victoria was reframing her requests for money as sophisticated financial strategy that would benefit everyone involved rather than simple assistance for a struggling young couple. She had prepared elaborate documentation for this conversation, including spreadsheets showing how my investment in their business and lifestyle would generate returns through Victoria's projected business success, David's career advancement, and what she described as family equity building through strategic asset development. If we can stabilize our financial foundation now, Victoria explained, pointing to her carefully prepared charts and projections, it creates a platform for exponential growth that benefits everyone. My business development accelerates David, can focus on his career without financial stress, and you get both financial returns and the satisfaction of seeing your family thrive. Exponential growth that benefits everyone. Victoria was presenting a vision where my financial support would generate not just business returns, but family harmony and personal satisfaction for me as a supportive mother and savvy investor. But what was most concerning about this presentation was how Victoria had begun incorporating assumptions about my long-term financial planning and estate considerations into her justifications for current support. At your stage of life, having your assets working to support family success rather than just sitting in conservative investments probably makes both financial and emotional sense, Victoria said, her tone carefully calibrated to sound respectful rather than presumptuous. You've already achieved financial security, so using some of that wealth to accelerate the next generation's success creates value that goes beyond pure financial returns. At your stage of life, having your assets working to support family success. Victoria was arguing that my age and financial position created both the opportunity and the obligation to support their ventures, framing her requests as appropriate wealth management rather than exploitation of family relationships. This approach was particularly manipulative because it combined legitimate considerations about intergenerational wealth transfer with assumptions about my priorities and obligations that I had never expressed. Victoria was essentially telling me what my money should be used for based on her assessment of my life stage and family responsibilities. The Christmas visit also revealed the extent to which Victoria had been researching my background, financial position, and personal circumstances. She demonstrated detailed knowledge of my previous businesses, my current investment portfolio, my real estate holdings, and even my charitable giving patterns. I've been reading about your work with the Pacific Northwest Technology Foundation, Victoria mentioned during one conversation, and I'm so impressed by your commitment to supporting women in technology. Your backing of my startup would actually be consistent with that philanthropic focus, since you'd be helping a woman entrepreneur overcome the funding barriers that disproportionately affect female founders. Your backing of my startup would be consistent with your philanthropic focus on supporting women in technology. Victoria was arguing that providing her with money wasn't just business investment or family support, but was actually aligned with my established charitable values and giving priorities. This framing was particularly insidious because it contained enough truth to be compelling while obscuring the fundamental deception about Victoria's qualifications and business prospects. She was using my legitimate commitment to supporting women in technology to create pressure for me to support her fraudulent claims about revolutionary healthcare AI development. But the most revealing moment of the Christmas visit came when Victoria began discussing her timeline for business development and the role she envisioned for me in her company's growth. Ideally, I'd like to have the Series A funding round completed by next summer, Victoria said, which means I need to have the prototype fully developed and some initial customer validation by spring. Your bridge funding would allow me to focus completely on development, rather than splitting time between consulting work and startup activities. Bridge funding that would allow her to focus completely on development. Victoria was describing my potential investment as temporary assistance that would enable her rapid progress toward legitimate external funding, rather than ongoing dependence on family money. What kind of involvement would you want in the company as it develops? I asked. That's entirely up to you, Victoria replied smoothly. I would love to have your strategic advice and industry connections, but I know you're enjoying retirement and probably don't want the stress of active business involvement. The beautiful thing about this arrangement is that it can be as hands-on or hands-off as you prefer. As hands-on or hands-off as you prefer. Victoria was offering me the choice between active involvement and passive investment, while making it clear that she expected minimal oversight regardless of my financial contribution. This approach was designed to appeal to different aspects of my personality and circumstances. If I wanted to be actively involved, Victoria would welcome my expertise and connections. If I preferred to remain detached, she would handle everything independently. Either way, she would have access to my money without significant accountability or oversight. But what Victoria couldn't have anticipated was that my decision about involvement level would be based not on my personal preferences, but on my growing suspicions about her honesty and competence. By the end of their Christmas visit, I had made a decision that would change everything. I was going to provide Victoria with the financial support she was requesting, but I was also going to conduct the most thorough investigation of her background, capabilities, and business claims that I had ever undertaken for any investment opportunity. Victoria's sophisticated manipulation campaign had convinced me that she was far more dangerous than a simple con artist or delusional entrepreneur. She was someone who combined genuine intelligence and social skills with complete willingness to exploit family relationships for financial gain. The only way to protect both David and myself was to give her enough rope to hang herself while carefully documenting every lie, exaggeration, and manipulation tactic she employed. What Victoria didn't know, as she left Portland feeling confident about her successful manipulation of David's naive mother, was that the retired old woman she was exploiting had just decided to treat her like a business problem that required systematic analysis and strategic response. The woman who would soon call me just old was about to discover that decades of experience in competitive business environments had taught me not just how to recognize sophisticated manipulation, but how to document it thoroughly and respond to it decisively. Victoria Chen had chosen to play a complex game with someone who had spent 45 years mastering the rules she was trying to use against me. And she had no idea that her target was about to become her most dangerous opponent. The decision to fund Victoria's requests while simultaneously investigating her claims marked the beginning of the most intensive business intelligence operation I had ever conducted. What I discovered over the following 6 months was a masterclass in sophisticated fraud that went far beyond simple financial deception. Victoria had constructed an entire alternate reality around her professional capabilities and business prospects, and she had become so invested in maintaining this fiction that I began to wonder if she had started to believe her own lies. I began by establishing what I privately called the documentation protocol, a systematic approach to recording every interaction, claim, and financial request that Victoria made. Having spent decades in competitive business environments where verbal agreements and handshake deals could quickly become expensive misunderstandings, I had learned the importance of creating comprehensive paper trails for any significant financial arrangement. Every phone conversation with Victoria was recorded, legally, since Oregon is a one-party consent state. Every email and text message was saved and backed up. Every financial request was documented with timestamps, specific amounts, stated purposes, and Victoria's explanations for why the money was needed. Most importantly, I began systematically fact-checking every claim Victoria made about her background, experience, and business development activities. What emerged from this investigation was a pattern of deception so comprehensive and carefully constructed that I had to acknowledge Victoria's remarkable intelligence and planning capabilities, even while recognizing the criminal nature of her activities. The first major red flag appeared when I began investigating Victoria's claimed partnerships with healthcare organizations. According to her business plan and our conversations, she was actively working with 3 major hospital systems to implement early versions of her predictive AI technology, generating both consulting revenue and real-world validation data for her algorithms. Using my extensive network of contacts in the healthcare technology industry, I was able to discreetly verify these claims. What I discovered was that Victoria had indeed worked with these organizations, but in a capacity that bore no resemblance to her descriptions of revolutionary AI implementation. At Pacific Northwest Medical Center, Victoria had been hired as a temporary consultant to help optimize patient flow patterns in their emergency department. The project lasted 3 months, involved basic data analysis using standard spreadsheet tools, and resulted in minor scheduling adjustments that improved efficiency by approximately 12%. Her work was competent but entirely routine, the kind of operational improvement consulting that hundreds of analysts perform every year. At Cascade Healthcare Systems, Victoria had worked on a 6-week project to analyze staffing patterns in their cardiac care unit. Again, her work involved basic statistical analysis and resulted in recommendations for shift scheduling adjustments. The hospital administrator I spoke with remembered Victoria as capable and professional, but had no knowledge of any AI development or predictive analytics work. Most revealing was my conversation with Dr. Sarah Kim, the Chief Information Officer at Northwest Regional Hospital, who had direct oversight of all technology implementation projects at their facility. Victoria Chen. Yes, I remember her, Dr. Kim said when I mentioned Victoria's name during what I framed as a reference check for a potential consulting arrangement. She did some good work on our resource allocation optimization project last year. Very bright woman, excellent analytical skills. Why do you ask? I'm considering working with her on a healthcare AI project, I said carefully, and I wanted to understand her experience with predictive analytics implementation. Dr. Kim paused. I'm not sure what you mean by predictive analytics implementation. Victoria's work with us was focused on operational efficiency, scheduling, resource allocation, that sort of thing. She never mentioned any AI development work, and we certainly haven't implemented any predictive analytics systems. No AI development work, and no predictive analytics implementation. Victoria had been taking routine consulting projects and inflating them into claims about revolutionary technology development and clinical validation. But what made Victoria's deception particularly sophisticated was how she had used her legitimate consulting experience to create believable narratives about more advanced work. She understood healthcare operations well enough to speak knowledgeably about the challenges and opportunities in the industry, and she had enough technical background to sound credible when discussing AI and machine learning concepts. The second major red flag emerged when I began investigating Victoria's claimed technical collaborators and advisory relationships. According to her business plan, she was working with several PhD-level data scientists and machine learning experts who were helping her develop the proprietary algorithms that formed the core of her technology. I hired a private investigator who specialized in corporate and academic background verification to track down these supposed collaborators. What we discovered was that most of the people Victoria claimed as technical advisors either didn't exist, had never heard of her, or had only peripheral connections to her through online courses or professional networking events. Dr. Michael Chang, whom Victoria had described as her lead AI algorithm developer, turned out to be a computer science professor at the University of Washington who had never worked with Victoria in any capacity. When my investigator contacted him, Dr. Chang was bewildered by the description of his supposed role in Victoria's company. I have no idea who Victoria Chen is, Dr. Chang said. I certainly haven't developed any algorithms for a healthcare startup. This is very concerning. Someone is using my name and credentials without permission. Jennifer Liu, described as Victoria's machine learning consultant, was a recent PhD graduate who had attended one of Victoria's presentations at a Seattle tech meetup. When contacted, Ms. Liu remembered Victoria as enthusiastic and knowledgeable, but confirmed that they had never worked together on any projects. She asked me some questions about neural network architectures after my presentation, Ms. Liu explained, and we exchanged contact information, but that was the extent of our interaction. I never agreed to work with her on anything. The pattern continued across Victoria's entire claimed technical team. She had taken casual networking interactions, academic presentations, and online course enrollments and transformed them into claims about professional collaborations and advisory relationships. But perhaps the most damaging discovery was what I learned about Victoria's actual technical capabilities. While she had taken several online courses in data science and machine learning, her understanding of these subjects was superficial at best. The AI algorithms she claimed to have developed were actually slightly modified versions of publicly available machine learning libraries, with customizations that demonstrated basic competence, but nothing approaching the revolutionary capabilities she was claiming. Dr. Patricia Kim, the technical consultant I had hired to evaluate Victoria's work, provided a devastating assessment of her actual capabilities. Dr. Rodriguez, what Victoria has created is essentially a basic data analysis tool that uses standard machine learning techniques to identify patterns in healthcare data, Dr. Kim explained. There's nothing proprietary about the algorithms, nothing revolutionary about the approach, and nothing that would justify the accuracy claims she's making. This is undergraduate-level work dressed up with sophisticated marketing language. Could this technology be developed into something more substantial with additional resources and expertise? I asked. Theoretically, yes, but it would require a complete reconstruction of the technical approach, a team of actual AI researchers, and several years of development work. What Victoria has created is so far from her claimed capabilities that it's essentially a different product entirely. Undergraduate-level work dressed up with sophisticated marketing language. Victoria's technical deception was even more comprehensive than her professional experience fabrication. The third major red flag appeared when I began investigating Victoria's financial claims and business projections. According to her documentation, she was generating substantial consulting revenue that was funding her startup development, and she had received preliminary interest from several venture capital firms for Series A funding. Working with my financial advisor and forensic accounting consultant, I was able to piece together Victoria's actual financial situation. What we discovered was someone living well beyond her means while creating the illusion of business success and financial stability. Victoria's consulting income over the previous year had totaled approximately $45,000, enough to supplement David's salary for basic living expenses, but nowhere near the level required to fund technology development or maintain the lifestyle she was presenting to potential investors. Most of her consulting work had been short-term projects that paid modest fees for routine analysis work. More concerning was how Victoria was using her preliminary financial support from me to create the appearance of business success. Rather than investing the money in legitimate business development activities, she was using it to fund a lifestyle and professional image that supported her fundraising narrative. The expensive apartment in Bellevue, the professional wardrobe, the networking events, the business lunches with potential investors, all of this was being funded by my money while being presented as evidence of Victoria's business acumen and market validation. She's essentially using your investment to create a fake business that she can use to attract additional investment, my forensic accountant explained. It's a sophisticated version of a Ponzi scheme, where each round of funding is used to create the appearance of success that justifies the next round of funding. But what made Victoria's financial deception particularly insidious was how she was using my support to gain credibility with legitimate investors and business partners. Having a family office backing her startup made Victoria appear more legitimate to potential institutional investors, even though the family office consisted entirely of her manipulation of her boyfriend's mother. The fourth major red flag came when I began investigating Victoria's claims about investor interest and market validation. According to her updates and reports, she was in active discussions with several venture capital firms and had received preliminary term sheets for series of funding. Using my extensive network in the venture capital community, I was able to discreetly verify these claims. What I discovered was that Victoria had indeed met with several VC firms, but these meetings had been brief introductory conversations that had not progressed to serious due diligence or funding discussions. James Morrison, a partner at Pacific Ventures who Victoria had claimed was very excited about our technology and market potential, provided a very different perspective when I contacted him about a potential co-investment opportunity. Victoria Chen? Yes, we met with her briefly. Last month, Morrison said. Interesting person, but the technology claims seemed overstated and the business model was unclear. We passed on further discussions after the initial meeting. Did she mention any family office backing or preliminary funding? I asked. She did mention some family support, which actually made us more skeptical rather than less. In our experience, entrepreneurs who rely primarily on family funding often haven't done the hard work of validating their business model with objective third parties. Family support that made them more skeptical rather than less. Victoria's use of my backing was actually hurting her credibility with sophisticated investors, rather than helping it. The pattern continued across the venture capital community. Victoria had managed to get introductory meetings with several firms, but none of them had progressed beyond initial conversations. Her technology claims were consistently viewed as overstated, her business model as unclear, and her market validation as insufficient. But perhaps most revealing was what I learned about how Victoria was presenting her family backing to potential investors. Rather than describing it as temporary bridge funding from a supportive family member, she was claiming to have strategic investment from a prominent technology industry veteran with extensive healthcare expertise. A prominent technology industry veteran with extensive healthcare expertise. Victoria was using my actual credentials and background to enhance her credibility, while simultaneously dismissing my current technical knowledge and business judgment as outdated and irrelevant. The fifth and most personal red flag emerged when I began to understand how Victoria was managing her relationship with David and controlling the information flow between us. Using a combination of direct observation, careful questioning, and discreet investigation, I began to piece together the extent to which Victoria was manipulating David's perceptions and emotions to maintain her scheme. David was completely unaware of the discrepancies between Victoria's claims and her actual capabilities and activities. When I asked him specific questions about Victoria's work, his answers consistently reflected the inflated narratives she had provided, rather than the modest reality of her actual accomplishments. Victoria's been incredibly busy with her healthcare AI development, David told me during one conversation. She's working with several major hospital systems to implement her predictive analytics technology, and the early results are really promising. The accuracy rates she's achieving are unprecedented in the industry. Unprecedented accuracy rates and implementation across several major hospital systems. David was repeating Victoria's fabricated claims as if they were confirmed facts, demonstrating how effectively she had isolated him from objective information about her work. But what was most concerning was how Victoria was using David's emotional investment in their relationship to prevent him from asking critical questions about her business activities. She had positioned herself as the ambitious entrepreneur who was working tirelessly to build their future together, making any skepticism about her claims seem like lack of support for their relationship. David feels like he can't question Victoria's business decisions because she's working so hard to create financial security for their future, my sister Helen observed after spending time with them during a family gathering. He's convinced that her success is their success, and he doesn't want to seem unsupportive by asking difficult questions. Victoria had created a dynamic where David's love and loyalty actually prevented him from protecting himself and his family from her deception. The sixth red flag appeared when I began investigating Victoria's graduate school background and professional credentials. While she did have an MBA from Wharton, her academic record and post-graduation activities were not what she had implied in her business presentations. Victoria had completed her MBA with average grades, focusing on general management, rather than healthcare or technology specialization. Her thesis had been a routine analysis of operational efficiency in small healthcare practices, competent work, but nothing that suggested the deep technical knowledge or innovative thinking she was claiming in her startup presentations. More concerning was what I learned about Victoria's activities immediately after graduation. Rather than diving into healthcare technology consulting as she had implied, Victoria had spent 2 years working for a general management consulting firm doing routine business analysis for mid-sized companies. Her healthcare industry experience was limited to a few short-term projects, and her technology background was entirely self-taught through online courses and professional development seminars. Victoria was a solid consultant, but not particularly innovative or specialized, said Margaret Chen, her former manager at the consulting firm. She was good at client management and basic analysis work, but I wouldn't have described her as someone with deep technical expertise or breakthrough insights. She left to pursue what she called entrepreneurial opportunities, but we assumed she was just starting her own consulting practice. Good at client management and basic analysis work, but not someone with deep technical expertise or breakthrough insights. Victoria's actual professional background was competent, but unremarkable. Nothing that would support her claims about revolutionary technology development or industry-changing innovation. The seventh and perhaps most troubling red flag emerged when I began to understand Victoria's long-term strategy and how she was positioning herself for continued access to family resources beyond the initial startup funding. Victoria had begun making subtle references to future family planning, real estate investments, and what she described as multi-generational wealth-building strategies that would require ongoing financial collaboration between us. She was already planning how to extend her access to my resources well beyond the current business venture. I've been thinking about how we can structure our family finances to optimize tax advantages and create long-term value, Victoria mentioned during one conversation. With your business experience and resources and our energy and growth potential, we could create some really powerful investment opportunities that benefit everyone. Multi-generational wealth-building strategies and powerful investment opportunities that benefit everyone. Victoria was laying the groundwork for expanded financial exploitation that would continue throughout her marriage to David and potentially beyond. But what made this particularly concerning was how Victoria was beginning to incorporate assumptions about my estate planning and inheritance decisions into her financial projections. She had started making casual references to how my support for their ventures would create lasting value for the entire family and ensure that my wealth would continue generating returns for generations. These comments suggested that Victoria was not just planning to exploit my current generosity, but was positioning herself to influence my long-term financial decisions and potentially my estate planning. She was thinking strategically about how to maximize her access to family resources over decades, rather than just months or years. By the spring, 6 months after I had begun my investigation, I had accumulated overwhelming evidence that Victoria was running a sophisticated fraud operation that went far beyond simple financial deception. She had constructed an elaborate alternate reality around her professional capabilities, business prospects, and financial needs, and she was using a combination of emotional manipulation, professional misrepresentation, and strategic relationship management to extract substantial financial resources from my family. But what made the situation particularly complex was that Victoria's deception was so comprehensive and well-constructed that exposing it would require destroying not just her fraudulent business venture, but her relationship with David and potentially her entire carefully constructed professional identity. Victoria had invested so much energy in maintaining her fabricated narrative that she had become trapped by her own deception. She couldn't admit the truth about her capabilities without losing everything she had worked to build: her relationship with David, her professional reputation, her access to family resources, and her vision of herself as a successful entrepreneur. More importantly, I had begun to realize that Victoria's manipulation of David was not just about gaining access to family money. She had systematically isolated him from objective information about her activities while making him emotionally dependent on her success. David's love for Victoria and his investment in their shared future had made him vulnerable to continued exploitation, even if her business ventures failed. The woman who would soon dismiss me as just old had created a web of deception so comprehensive that untangling it would require not just exposing her lies, but deprogramming my own son from months of sophisticated psychological manipulation. But what Victoria couldn't have known, as she continued to build her fraudulent empire using my money and family connections, was that the retired old woman she was manipulating had just completed the most thorough business intelligence investigation of her career. I now knew exactly who Victoria Chen really was, what she was actually capable of, and how she was systematically exploiting my family for financial gain. More importantly, I had documented every aspect of her deception with the kind of comprehensive evidence that could withstand any legal challenge or manipulation attempt. The woman who thought she was playing a complex game with a naive elderly, Target was about to discover that she had chosen to deceive someone who had spent 45 years mastering the art of strategic business warfare. Victoria Chen was about to learn that underestimating a Montgomery woman's intelligence, resources, and determination was the most expensive mistake she could possibly make. The moment that changed everything happened on a Thursday afternoon in July, 6 months after I had begun my investigation into Victoria's elaborate deception. I was sitting in my car outside TechHub Seattle, having just concluded a meeting with potential acquirers for one of my portfolio companies, when I decided to grab lunch at the cafe inside the building before driving back to Portland. TechHub Seattle was one of those glass and steel co-working spaces that attracted ambitious young entrepreneurs, established tech companies, and the venture capital investors who funded them. It was exactly the kind of place where Victoria would want to be seen conducting business meetings, projecting the image of success and innovation that was so crucial to maintaining her fraudulent narrative. As I walked through the main lobby, toward the cafe, I heard a familiar voice coming from one of the glass conference rooms that lined the central corridor. Victoria was in the middle of what appeared to be a pitch meeting with 3 professionally dressed individuals who were clearly potential investors. What I overheard in the next 60 seconds would have been shocking if I hadn't already spent months documenting Victoria's capacity for deception and manipulation. But hearing her dismiss me as just old, while simultaneously using my money and credentials to fund her fraudulent presentation, was the final confirmation I needed that Victoria Chen was not just a confused entrepreneur or delusional dreamer. She was a calculating predator who viewed my family as resources to be exploited without conscience or remorse. The beautiful thing about family funding, Victoria was saying to her audience, her voice carrying clearly through the glass walls, is that it comes without the oversight complications you get with institutional investors. David's mother is just old. She made some money in tech back in the day, but she doesn't really understand modern AI development or current market dynamics. She's basically a checkbook with sentimental attachment to family success. Just old. A checkbook with sentimental attachment to family success. Victoria was describing me as an outdated relic whose only value was financial, while simultaneously pitching technology that was based on my actual expertise and funded by my actual money. But what she said next was even more revealing about her true character and long-term strategy. David, Dr. Rodriguez, I think you're misinterpreting some comments that were taken out of context, Victoria said finally, her voice less confident than before. I may have expressed some frustration about family dynamics in ways that sounded harsher than I intended, but that doesn't change the fundamental reality that we're building something important together. Expressed some frustration about family dynamics. Victoria was attempting to minimize her systematic exploitation and manipulation as minor communication issues rather than deliberate fraud. Victoria, we have comprehensive financial documentation showing how you've used family money for personal expenses while claiming business development costs, David said, his voice becoming stronger as his anger overcame his emotional investment in protecting her. The expensive apartment, the professional wardrobe, the networking events, all of it funded by my mother's money, while you described it as evidence of your business success. And we have technical analysis proving that your AI development claims are completely fabricated, I added, placing the final folder on the table. What you've created is basic data analysis tools that you've misrepresented as revolutionary artificial intelligence. You have no proprietary technology, no clinical validation, and no legitimate basis for the investor presentations you've been making. Victoria stared at the folders on the table, apparently realizing that her comprehensive deception had been matched by equally comprehensive investigation. When she finally looked up, her expression had changed completely. The confident entrepreneur facade had been replaced by something much more calculating and desperate. "What do you want?" Victoria asked, her voice flat and businesslike. "Are you planning to destroy my relationship with David and ruin my professional reputation? Or is there something else you're trying to accomplish? What do you want?" Victoria was moving directly to negotiation mode, apparently accepting that her deception had been exposed while focusing on damage control and outcome management. "Victoria, I want you to repay the money you obtained through fraudulent misrepresentation," I said calmly. "I want you to contact everyone you've made false claims to about your technology and investor backing and correct those misrepresentations. And I want you to end your relationship with David so that he can move forward with his life without being tied to someone who has systematically manipulated and exploited our family." "And if I don't agree to those demands?" Victoria asked. "Then I'll pursue criminal fraud charges, civil lawsuits for damages, and I'll make sure that everyone in the Seattle tech community understands exactly who you are and what you've been doing," I replied. "Victoria, you've committed serious crimes, and you've caused significant financial and emotional damage to my family. The only question is whether you face the consequences privately or publicly." Victoria sat in silence for several minutes, clearly weighing her options and calculating the potential outcomes of different choices. When she finally spoke, her voice had taken on a tone I had never heard from her before: bitter, angry, and completely stripped of the charm and manipulation that had characterized all our previous interactions. "You know what, Dr. Rodriguez? You think you're so smart, but you're just a bitter old woman who can't stand that someone younger and more innovative was able to build something important with your resources," Victoria said, her mask finally dropping completely. "David deserves better than a controlling mother who investigates his fiancé like a criminal. And the tech industry deserves better than outdated thinking from people who can't understand modern innovation." A bitter old woman who can't understand modern innovation. Even in defeat, Victoria was trying to maintain her narrative about my irrelevance and technical incompetence, apparently unaware that she was speaking to someone whose expertise in her claimed field far exceeded her own. "Victoria," I said quietly, "before you continue with personal attacks, there's something you should know about my background and current activities." I pulled out one final folder, the one I had been saving for exactly this moment. 3 months ago, I completed the sale of MediCore Analytics to Health Tech Solutions for $1.2 million, I said, placing the signed purchase agreement on the table. MediCore Analytics was the AI-powered health monitoring startup I founded and developed over the past 2 years. "The technology you've been claiming to develop? I actually built it, validated it through clinical trials, and sold it to a major healthcare company." Victoria stared at the purchase agreement, her expression shifting from anger to confusion to dawning horror as she realized what I was telling her. "The just old woman you've been manipulating is actually a successful entrepreneur in the exact field you've been claiming to revolutionize," I continued. "I have real experience with AI-powered healthcare analytics, genuine relationships with the investors and healthcare organizations you've been pretending to work with, and detailed knowledge of both the technical and business challenges you claim to have solved." That's impossible," Victoria whispered. "Victoria, I spent 45 years building and selling technology companies," I said. "I have 3 patents in healthcare informatics. I've served on the boards of 2 major healthcare technology companies, and I completed my PhD in artificial intelligence applications at MIT in 1987. The woman you dismissed as technologically clueless has more expertise in your claimed field than you could acquire in a decade of legitimate study." David, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke. "Victoria, my mother is Dr. Margaret Rodriguez," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and anger that I had never heard from him before. She's one of the pioneers of medical AI applications. She's been quoted in dozens of industry publications, and she's advised venture capital firms on healthcare technology investments for over 20 years. How could you not know who she is? Victoria looked back and forth between David and me, apparently realizing that her fundamental assumptions about my background and capabilities had been catastrophically wrong. I did research, Victoria stammered. Your LinkedIn profile doesn't mention recent business activities. Victoria, successful entrepreneurs often maintain privacy about their current projects until they're ready for public announcement, I said. The fact that you based your exploitation strategy on incomplete research just demonstrates how unprofessional and unsophisticated your approach has been. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, but the outcome was never in doubt. Victoria agreed to repay the money she had fraudulently obtained, though she negotiated a payment plan that would take 18 months to complete. She agreed to end her engagement to David immediately, and to avoid any contact with our family during the repayment period. Most importantly, she agreed to withdraw all false claims about investor backing and technical capabilities, effectively ending her fraudulent startup venture. 6 months later, David had moved back to Portland and was working for a local engineering firm while rebuilding his confidence and judgment after the emotional trauma of discovering that his entire relationship had been based on systematic manipulation. He was hurt and angry, but he was also grateful that the deception had been exposed before he had married Victoria and potentially lost access to objective family support. Victoria made her repayment schedule for exactly 4 months before disappearing entirely, leaving Seattle without providing forwarding information and abandoning her obligations to repay the remaining money. However, by that point, I had already decided that pursuing her for the remaining funds would be more expensive and time-consuming than simply accepting the loss and moving forward with lessons learned. More importantly, Victoria's disappearance confirmed that she was indeed a career fraud artist who moved from target to target, rather than someone who had made serious mistakes and was committed to making amends. My decision to document everything and respond strategically rather than emotionally had protected my family from much more extensive long-term exploitation. A year after the confrontation, I established the Rodriguez Foundation for Elder Financial Protection, using part of the proceeds from my MediCore Analytics sale to fund education, investigation, and legal support for elderly people who had been targeted by sophisticated financial exploitation schemes. The foundation has helped dozens of families recognize and respond to manipulation tactics similar to those Victoria had used against us. David met someone new, a pediatric nurse named Sarah who loved him for his genuine kindness and integrity, rather than his access to family resources. Their relationship was built on mutual respect and honest communication rather than manipulation and exploitation. Most importantly, Sarah was delighted to have a close relationship with her future mother-in-law and frequently sought my advice about everything from career decisions to family planning. As for me, I learned that my instincts about people and strategic thinking had only improved with age and experience. The just old woman Victoria had dismissed as an easy target had turned out to be someone who understood business, human nature, and strategic warfare far better than she had anticipated. Victoria Chen had made the mistake of assuming that age meant vulnerability and that family relationships meant exploitable emotional attachments. She had learned too late that underestimating a woman with 45 years of business experience and unlimited resources for investigation and response was the most expensive error she could possibly make. The woman who had called me just old had discovered that experience, intelligence, and strategic thinking don't diminish with age. They become more refined and considerably more dangerous when directed at protecting the people you love from sophisticated predators who mistake generosity for weakness. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting someone discover that they've been playing a complex game with someone who invented several of the rules they were trying to use against you. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.